There's a specific kind of Harry Potter fanfiction that feels like someone finally slammed their hands on the table and said, "Enough, we're doing this properly." Initiating Operation Pronglet is that kind of story. It takes Sirius Black, a character canon treats like a tragic firework, and turns him into a strategist who's willing to weaponize the one thing he used to hate, pure blood power. And that's the controversial part. This fic doesn't just fix Harry's situation with good vibes and found family hugs. It asks what happens when the fix requires politics, rituals, money, social leverage, and a very uncomfortable willingness to play the game better than the people who built it. At its core, Book 1 is a Sirius-led reset of the post-third-year timeline, but not in a speed-run the greatest hits way. The story opens with Sirius in a state that feels brutally adult. Grief, regret, and that hollow clarity you get when you realize you've been surviving, not living. From there, the direction is clear. Sirius stops thinking like a fugitive and starts thinking like a guardian. He wants Harry safe, yes, but he also wants permanence. Not a temporary rescue, not a lucky break, not maybe Dumbledore will allow it. He wants legal and magical authority that can't be argued with. Tone-wise, this is a blend. Gritty emotional fallout, sharp humor that feels very Marauder-coded, and a surprisingly methodical, almost procedural energy. A lot of the tension comes from planning, reassessing what canon adults allowed to happen, and deciding how far Sirius is willing to go to stop history repeating itself. Underneath the plot machinery, this fic is really asking one question. What if Harry had an adult who loved him enough to become dangerous on purpose? Not dangerous in the Dark Lord sense. Dangerous in the way institutions fear most. Someone with a name, resources, and the willingness to use the system's own rules against it. The Ecrit story leans hard into the idea that magical power is not the same as real power. Real power is influence, credibility, access, and control of information. Sirius connects those dots, and once he does, he stops begging for justice and starts building leverage. That's also where the fic challenges canon. Canon is full of adults who mean well while children bleed. This story is not satisfied with well-intentioned. It's obsessed with outcomes. It keeps reframing the grown-ups' choices as something you can evaluate like policy. What did they do? What did it cost? And who paid the price? And if you're the kind of reader who likes morally grey problem-solving, this is the good stuff. Because Sirius doesn't become a saint, he becomes a planner. He starts thinking in contingencies and safeguards and, yes, reputation management. He treats guardianship like a campaign, not a heartfelt request. Sirius Black is the engine, and the portrayal is one of the fighty's biggest selling points. He's still Sirius. Intense, emotional, sarcastic, quick to rage. But the rage isn't random, it's structured. You can feel the shift from "I survived" to "I'm responsible now." What really works is how the fic uses his history as both a wound and a toolkit. His upbringing becomes relevant, not as edgy decoration, but as a reason he understands political theatre and family structures even when he hates them. There's a delicious irony to watching him reclaim the Black legacy while actively trying to detox it. That said, if you prefer Sirius as pure chaos gremlin, this version might feel a little too competent at times. The story wants him strategic, and occasionally, you can feel the narrative guiding him toward the cleanest, smartest move. For many readers, that's the fantasy. For others, it can flatten the spontaneity that makes him lovable. Remus Lupin is handled with a steadier hand than most fics manage. He's not just the soft, sad werewolf. He's practical, suspicious, emotionally complicated, and quietly furious about the way Harry has been managed. What I like here is that Remus isn't a passive support character. He pushes back, challenges Sirius, and provides the kind of grounded intelligence that turns a reckless plan into an executable one. Dumbledore is where reactions will split. This story is clearly interested in Dumbledore as a problem. Not a mustache-twirling villain, but a man whose confidence in his own judgment becomes a form of harm. There's a pointed thread that frames some of his canon decisions as containment strategies, especially around Harry's safety and Voldemort's return. If you like Dumbledore is complicated and sometimes wrong, you'll have a great time. If you're allergic to any version of Dumbledore that looks manipulative, you may feel the fic stacking the deck. Harry, interestingly, is mostly a gravitational force in Book 1, rather than a fully on-page, deeply interior character. He's the reason everything exists. The fic treats him like someone worth building a world for. You hear about his resilience, his instincts, and the cost of being left to endure. But if you need Harry's voice front and center from the start, this first stretch may feel like adults talking around him. And then there's the House of Black itself, which the fic uses as a symbol. The house isn't just set dressing, it's a machine Sirius can either let rot or rebuild, and that choice mirrors what the story is doing to canon itself. The style is readable, confident, and narrated with intention. It likes clarity. It likes momentum. It also likes structure. One of the most defining choices is how often the story turns strategy into a framework. Sirius doesn't just feel things, he organizes them. The fic leans into planning as a character trait, and it makes the narrative feel like it's moving with purpose, even when nothing explodes. Pacing is where I'd give the biggest warning and the biggest compliment. The compliment is that this book feels like setup that matters. It's laying track. It's establishing rules, resources, and a political map. When the fic slows down, it's usually because it's installing infrastructure for future payoff. The warning is that Book 1 can be talky. There are long stretches where the tension comes from explanation and reassessment, rather than present-time action. Characters recap major canon events as part of planning and debriefing. It makes sense in universe, and emotionally it's satisfying to watch adults finally react appropriately. But as pure reading experience, it can feel like you're sitting in a very entertaining meeting. If you love competent stories, those meetings are catnip. If you're here for constant forward motion, you might feel the gears turning a little too loudly. Let's talk strengths, because this fic has some real ones. First, the emotional spine is real. Sirius's guilt isn't decorative. It's pressure that shapes his choices, and it justifies why this isn't Sirius wins. It's Sirius refuses to lose again. Second, the central fantasy is incredibly satisfying. This is a guardianship and protection story that doesn't pretend love is enough. It treats love as motivation and then asks what love requires in a rigged world. That's why the political angle works. Sirius doesn't want to be liked. He wants Harry safe, and he's willing to become the kind of adult the wizarding world can't ignore. Third, the world building is purposeful. Things like inheritance magic, wards, house authority, and old family mechanisms aren't dropped in as aesthetic. They're tools. Sirius claiming his position isn't just a cool vibe moment. It's the story declaring its new playing field. Fourth, it nails marauders as adults. The humor isn't random meme speak. It's the kind of humor people use when they're trying not to drown. It keeps the story from becoming misery tourism, even when the subject matter gets heavy. And fifth, it recenters accountability. It refuses to let institutions hide behind prestige. Hogwarts, the ministry, revered leaders, beloved staff. The fic keeps asking, where were you? And why did children handle what adults wouldn't? Now the weakness is, because the trade-offs are real. The big one is exposition density. When the fic is in planning mode, it can over-explain. The recaps and deductions can start to feel like the story is proving its point instead of letting it land naturally. If you're already familiar with canon, you may occasionally feel like, yes, I know, I was there, even if the character reactions are the point. Dumbledore's framing can also feel heavy-handed, depending on your tolerance. The fic works hard to make a case that his choices were not merely mistakes. Sometimes it lands as chillingly plausible. Sometimes it risks simplifying a character who, in canon, thrives on ambiguity. Convenience is another pressure point. The story makes certain pieces of information arrive early and cleanly, which is partly the appeal of a fix-it. Still, for some readers, the sense of the board is being set can occasionally tip into the story is arranging outcomes. The tone can wobble too. It's balancing grief, abuse implications, and comedic banter. Most of the time, that contrast is a strength. Sometimes it can feel like the emotional weight gets parked so the plan can keep moving. And finally, Harry's relative distance in the early movement may frustrate you if you want the heart of the story to be Harry's interior healing. Book 1 is more about building the rescue vehicle than showing the ride. So who is this for? You'll love this if you want Sirius-centric storytelling with real agency and long-term strategy. If you like wizarding politics and lore, if you like the how power actually works angle, and if you want found family that's built through choices and sacrifice instead of instant vibes, this is going to hit. You might bounce off if you dislike lordship frameworks and inheritance magic mechanics, if you want fast action over setup, if you prefer a gentler, more canon-faithful Dumbledore, or if you need Harry's perspective to dominate from the very start. My final take: Initiating Operation Pronglet is a bold kind of fix-it. Not a comfort blanket, more like armor you forge in real time. It's at its best when it lets Sirius be both deeply broken and frighteningly capable, when it treats love as fuel and strategy as the engine. If you can enjoy a story that starts with infrastructure, politics, and hard conversations, you're in for a satisfying ride. If you need payoff immediately, or you want the fic to stay emotionally soft and uncomplicated, this one might feel like it's asking you to sit through the War Council before you get the rescue. Either way, it's memorable, not because it's loud, but because it dares to answer a question canon avoids. What if the adults actually did something? And what if doing something meant getting your hands dirty?